I asked when the wedding would be, and my daughter-in-law answered, "We got married yesterday." A week later, I was standing in the center of the most expensive ballroom in New York City, holding a glass of champagne. The lights glittered, the music was soft, and 200 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. At the center of it all, my son James and his wife, Sophia, perfect, happy, the very picture of a dream they had built on my exclusion. "A toast from the mother of the groom," the event planner announced. I walked to the small stage, each step firm, calculated. My heart wasn't pounding. It was beating with a glacial calm. Everyone expected tears, an emotional speech from the widow watching her only son start a new life, and I wouldn't disappoint them. I would give them emotion. I raised my glass. Sophia's smile was radiant. James's was a little more tense. "I would like to welcome Sophia," I began, my voice clear, without a tremor. "Welcome to a family that values, above all else, honesty. And for that, Sophia, I want to thank you for your courage." I paused. The room fell silent. The courage to start over from scratch, leaving behind debts so large they could sink a battleship. A toast to your bravery and to the generosity of my son, who now has such a heavy anchor to bear. The silence that followed was louder than any music. I saw Sophia's smile freeze and then shatter. James turned white as a sheet. They wanted a spectacle to celebrate a lie. I simply gave them the truth as a wedding gift. This story is just beginning. To understand the betrayal that led to this extreme moment, subscribe now and ring the bell so you don't miss a single detail of this story. That night, I didn't leave the ballroom as Catherine. I left as a monster, the wicked mother-in-law, the bitter widow who, consumed by jealousy, tried to destroy her own son's happiness. In the days that followed, that was the role they gave me, and the script spread like wildfire. Aunts would call, their voices dripping with a false concern that barely hid their gossipy pleasure. "Catherine, what was that?" In front of so many people, poor Sophia was devastated. Poor Sophia, the fragile bride, attacked for no reason on the happiest day of her life. And I, the cruel and unhinged villain, driven by a sick possessiveness. That's the picture they painted of me, in broad, ugly strokes, with no room for nuance. It's an easy caricature to hate. What that painting doesn't show are my hands, rough and worn from the 20 years I worked 2 jobs to make sure James had the best. It doesn't show the nights I came home exhausted, after a shift at the hospital followed by another doing accounting for a small firm, and still found the strength to review his homework. They forgot that I sold my late husband's car, the last material memory I had of him, to make the down payment for my son's engineering degree. I gave up vacations, new clothes, any kind of luxury, because every dollar was a brick in the foundation of his future. My grief transformed into a project, James's success. He was my masterpiece. The only thing I had left after cancer took my husband. When Sophia entered our lives, I didn't see her as a threat. I saw her as the missing piece. I welcomed her not as a daughter-in-law, but as the daughter I never had. I opened my home, my arms, my heart. I told her secrets about James that only a mother could know. I entrusted her with my hopes for the future. I helped her pick out their first apartment, gave her jewelry that had been my mother's, taught her the recipe for James's favorite dish. I loved her. I loved her with the desperate strength of a lonely woman who saw in her the promise of a complete family again. I didn't want to control them. I wanted to belong. My mistake, perhaps, was that, to love with the ferocity of someone who had nothing else, to protect with the fury of a lioness who smelled danger where everyone else saw only a helpless gazelle. They judge me for the final act, for the scandal, for the scene I caused. But no one asks how much pain it takes to force a quiet woman to scream. Everyone knew me as the Catherine who endured everything. They were about to discover the noise my silence could make, the noise my silence could make. That noise wasn't born of jealousy, as they whisper now. It was born from a much older and deeper desire, to preserve the one thing money can't buy, and death couldn't erase: my husband's legacy. Richard wasn't a man of wealth, but he was a man of his word. In our community, his name was synonymous with integrity. He was the kind of man whose handshake was his bond. He taught me that the foundation of any solid construction, be it a house or a family, is truth. Without it, everything collapses. When he was gone, I swore to myself that James would be a man like his father, that he would understand that character is the only asset no one can ever take from you. My hidden desire, the force that secretly moved me, was simple: to see our family name, Richard's name, honored and carried forward on that same foundation of honesty. For me, James's wedding was never about the party, the dress, or the gifts. It was a sacrament, a sacred act where he wouldn't just be joining his life to someone else's, but building the next floor of the edifice his father had started. I imagined the ceremony as a moment of profound reverence, where the vows exchanged would have the weight of granite. I saw my son at the altar, not as the boy I raised, but as the man he would become, the guardian of our moral inheritance. And the woman beside him, she wouldn't just be his wife, she would be the co-guardian, the person who would understand the weight and beauty of that legacy. I longed with all my soul for a partnership of truths, a haven of integrity in a world that seems to have forgotten its value. It was an old-fashioned desire, perhaps, the yearning of a widow clinging to principles that many now consider disposable. And I felt guilty for it, for wanting something so absolute. That guilt made me ignore the first signs, the small cracks in Sophia's perfect facade. It started with trivial things, stories that didn't add up. Once, she described in detail her childhood vacations at a family ranch out west, but months later, she casually mentioned that her parents had never owned property and that she barely knew the countryside. On another occasion, she spoke of the prestigious Ivy League college she dropped out of for lack of passion, but the class ring she wore in an old photo was from a completely different and far less reputable university. They were small inconsistencies, easy to dismiss as memory lapses or social embellishments, and I tried hard to dismiss them. I accused myself of splitting hairs, of being the cliché mother-in-law who distrusts the woman who stole her son. I wanted her to be perfect so badly that I forced my eyes not to see. My desire for the truth became a silent obsession the day I tried, as gently as possible, to address one of these inconsistencies. Sophia had told friends about a family inheritance that would allow her to open a business in the future. I knew, from a prior conversation with her mother, that this was a fantasy. In private, with the utmost care, I asked James about it. "Son, maybe it would be good to manage expectations," I began. His reaction was a wall of ice. "Mom, are you implying Sophia is a liar?" he said, his voice cutting. "I don't know what you have against her, but this is jealousy. It's possessiveness. Leave her alone." At that moment, Sophia, who overheard the conversation, walked into the room with tears in her eyes, saying she was sorry if my presence made her feel inadequate. She was the victim. I, the aggressor, and James, her faithful knight. There, I understood the obstacle. It wasn't just Sophia's facade. It was my son's blind devotion to it. The truth didn't stand a chance against an illusion so well crafted and so fiercely protected. After that accusation from James, I retreated. The wall he built around Sophia was impenetrable, and I was tired of crashing against it. For the first time, I questioned if my instincts were, in fact, wrong. Perhaps I was just the ghost of a mother who didn't know when to let go. So I made a decision. I would be silent. I would swallow my doubts and play the part I was assigned, the happy, proud mother. I threw myself into the wedding preparations as if my life depended on it. I bought the most elegant navy blue dress I could find, spent weeks searching for the perfect wedding gift, and began writing a speech for the toast, a text full of love and hope. Every word a small lie I told myself. I was at peace with this lie. It was the price for harmony, and I was willing to pay it. On a sunny Tuesday, my heart light for the first time in months, I decided to call them. I had found in one of my jewelry boxes a pair of gold cufflinks that belonged to Richard, the same ones he wore at our wedding. It was my way of giving James his blessing, of connecting the past to the future. I wanted my son to wear them at the altar. I dialed his number, a smile already on my lips, imagining his reaction. Sophia answered. "Hi, Catherine. How are you?" she said, her voice unnaturally cheerful, with the sound of cutlery in the background. "So glad you called. We were just talking about you." I felt a warmth in my chest. "That's lovely, dear. I was calling about the wedding. I have a special gift for James to wear on the day." There was a short pause on the other end of the line. The clinking of cutlery stopped. "Oh, the wedding," she said, and the lightness in her voice was replaced by something I couldn't decipher. "So, that's the funny thing. We kind of rushed it." My smile froze. "What do you mean you rushed it?" I could hear James breathing in the background. He was there, silent. His silence was always an omen. "Well," Sophia continued, with the nonchalance of someone commenting on the weather, "we got married yesterday." The words didn't make sense. They were just sounds floating in the air, disconnected from reality. Married. Yesterday. My brain tried to process it, but the shock was a physical barrier. The phone in my hand felt like it weighed a ton. "How?" was the only word I could manage, my voice a hoarse whisper. It was something really small, last minute, just us and the witnesses. You know, just for the immediate family. We'll have a big party for everyone later, she concluded, and then went back to talking to James, as if she had just given me a trivial message. I stood in silence, listening to the sound of their life continuing on the other end of the line, while mine had stopped spinning. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. There were no screams, no tears, just a deep, icy void. I walked through the house like an automaton. The dress on the closet door was a ridiculous costume. The cufflinks in my hand were relics from a world that no longer existed. I went to James's old room. His room had always been my sanctuary, a museum of happiness, frozen in time. I sat on his bed, the smell of his books and his adolescence still in the air. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just seeking refuge in the only version of my son I still recognized. My eyes stopped on a bookshelf. One of the hardcover books, a classic I had given him, was slightly out of place. I pushed it back and felt something blocking the way. Behind the books, hidden at the back of the shelf, was a small, dark wooden box. It wasn't his. I knew every object in that room. With trembling hands, I pulled out the box. It was locked, but taped to the bottom was a tiny key. I turned the key in the lock. The soft click of the latch opening sounded like a gunshot in the silence of my grief. I lifted the lid. Inside, on faded red velvet, was a stack of letters tied with a ribbon. And on top, an envelope with a name that was not Sophia's. In that instant, grief gave way to something new, a cold certainty, sharp as a razor. The truth wasn't just being hidden from me, it was being buried. The click of the lock echoed in the room, but to me, it sounded like a bone snapping. My hands, which had been trembling with shock, were now still over the dark wood. I picked up the first envelope. The handwriting was elegant but rushed. It wasn't Sophia's. The letter read, "My dearest C, I know things have been difficult since the trouble with your father, but you need to keep your head up. This guy, the engineer, he's your golden ticket. No one in New York needs to know what happened back home. To them, you are whoever you want to be." I read the sentence 10 times. Each reading was a fresh blow to the gut. Trouble with your father. Golden ticket. This wasn't a love letter. It was an instruction manual for a con. The truth I was holding wasn't just about trivial lies, but a fundamental fraud. And my James? He was the perfect mark. The weight of those words pulled me back to the raw humiliation of that phone call. Sophia's voice, that casual, triumphant tone. "We got married yesterday." It wasn't the voice of a happy bride sharing spontaneous news. It was the voice of a conqueror planting her flag on enemy territory. It was a declaration of ownership. She wasn't just telling me about the wedding. She was informing me that I had lost, just for the immediate family. The phrase was the cruelest of all, a masterpiece of manipulation. It placed me on the outside not by accident, but by decree. I, the woman who brought him into the world, was reclassified. I had become a stranger, and James's silence, oh, his silence, that was the real poison. He was there, listening to her voice discard me with surgical coldness, and he allowed it. He was complicit. The days that followed were a blur of dull pain. I canceled my appointments, ignored calls. I would look in the mirror and see a foolish woman, a pathetic widow who had confused dependency with motherly love. The house became a prison. Every smiling photograph of James was an accusation. Then, on the third night of my self-imposed exile, I saw it. A distant cousin of Sophia's, Emily, had posted a photo on social media. It was from a dinner at a sophisticated restaurant. At the head of the table, James and Sophia, toasting, radiant. And around them, smiling, were Sophia's parents, her older brother, and her younger sister. The caption was the final nail in my emotional coffin. A toast to the most beautiful surprise wedding. A small celebration, just with the closest family, as it should be. Closest family. In that instant, the air left my lungs. It wasn't a wedding for two. It was a planned event, with her family. The only person who was deliberately, intentionally, surgically removed from the equation was me. The pain I felt then was different. It was no longer the pain of loss. It was the pain of injury. And beneath that pain, something new began to form. An ember of fury, cold, dark, and terribly lucid. The image on my phone screen burned my retinas. The smiles, the raised glasses, the complicity, their family. At that moment, something inside me irrevocably shifted. The ember of fury became a white-hot flame, one that didn't destroy but illuminated everything with a terrible clarity. I saw the game. I saw the pieces, and for the first time, I saw my place on the board. I stood up from the bed, my body no longer heavy with grief. I went to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. The swollen, red eyes of the woman who had cried for 3 days were gone. In their place was a firm, calculating gaze. It was the look of someone who no longer felt, but thought. The victim, Catherine. The heartbroken mother. The foolish woman who was deceived. She died that night, and from her grave, a new woman arose. A woman who no longer bled. A woman who, instead, sharpened her claws. I went to the kitchen, made a strong coffee, and sat at the table. My mind was a war room buzzing with activity. I began to analyze Sophia's strategy. Her initial sweetness was infiltration. Her little lies were test balloons. Her masterpiece was isolating me, painting my concern as control, my love as possessiveness. I realized then that in their twisted fairy tale, the role of the villain had always been reserved for me. Every love story needs a dragon to be slayed for the happily ever after to feel earned. And what better dragon than the lonely, jealous mother-in-law? If I was doomed to be the villain in their story, then so be it. But I would no longer follow the script they wrote. I would take the pen and write my own ending. With this new resolve pulsing in my veins, I returned to James's room. The wooden box was no longer a chest of pain, but a Pandora's box I was about to turn to my advantage. I spread the letters and documents on the floor. I didn't read with the heart of a betrayed mother, but with the mind of a prosecutor preparing a case. Each word was evidence. Each date, a contradiction. Each lie, a nail in the coffin of the farce they had built. They thought my pain would silence me forever. They didn't know that the humiliation hadn't destroyed me, it had forged me. That night, the grieving widow was replaced. In her place stood a strategist. I started connecting the dots. I wasn't piecing together the fragments of my pain. I was assembling the map of their war. Right now, I feel like only you can understand my pain. Tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I make a point to read and reply to everyone. A war is won not with a single shout of fury, but with a succession of silent, precise moves. By dawn, my dining table was a command center. I needed more than anonymous letters. I needed cold, hard facts. An online search led me to a name. Jack Riley, a private investigator. His specialty was personal due diligence and background verification for mergers and acquisitions. I smiled. A merger and acquisition. The perfect definition for that wedding. I met him at a discreet downtown cafe. I didn't tell him my story. I simply handed him an envelope with a copy of the most incriminating letter, a photo of Sophia, and a check that made him raise his eyebrows. My instructions were brief. I want her real name if it's different. I want a full credit report. I want to know about the trouble with the father and her family's true financial situation. I want documents, not rumors. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. Consider it done. That handshake was the first shot in my war. A shot no one heard. While Jack moved his pieces in the shadows, I explored a front where I had a tactical advantage. James's finances. I remembered a joint savings account we had that he rarely used. I logged in online. There it was. A pattern of monthly transfers to a debt collection agency. The real blow came when I called his investment manager, a man who had known me for years. Playing the part of the concerned mother, I asked if James's investments were secure for his future. "Don't you worry, Catherine," he said. "That large withdrawal he made last month was for a good cause, I'm sure." My voice remained calm. "Ah, yes, the down payment for the house. Glad it worked out." There was a pause. "A house?" "No. The amount he took out could buy a luxury car. He mentioned it was to help his fiancé's family with an old emergency." An old emergency. I hung up, my hand trembling. My son wasn't just being deceived. He was financing the fraud. The final piece was social confirmation. I went back to the profile of the cousin, Emily, who had posted the wedding dinner photo. I sent her a private message, a carefully crafted text of feigned goodwill. "Emily dear, this is Catherine, James's mother. I feel heartbroken to have missed such a special moment. I'd love to send Sophia's parents a gift. Could you please share their address back in Ohio?" I wanted it to be a surprise. I used the information from the letter as bait. The reply came in minutes. "Catherine, that's so sweet. But they don't live in Ohio. They live nearby in Jersey City. Her dad's company went bankrupt, poor things. They had a really rough time. But Sophia is a warrior, isn't she? Bingo. I kept the conversation flowing. By the end, I had the whole story. Not Sophia's heroic version, but the real one, full of bankruptcy, debt, and a hasty move to escape the shame. I saved the screenshots. They were my trump card. A week after I received Jack's final report, my arsenal was complete. It was time to advance onto the battlefield, and my first move would be the most unexpected of all: a peace offering. I called James. Instead of the explosion he expected, I gave him my best impression of a repentant mother, my voice soft and vulnerable. "Son," I began, "I'm sorry for the silence. The news, it just caught me by surprise. If you're happy, I'm happy. My initial shock was selfish of me. Please forgive me." I heard a sigh of relief. "Mom, I knew you'd understand," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Sophia and I really want to talk to you. How about we all have dinner this week?" The bait was taken. "I'd love that, sweetheart. Why don't you come over? I'll make that pot roast you love." The invitation was a white flag. He had no idea it was the flag marking a minefield. On the night of the dinner, I was the personification of the perfect mother-in-law. The house smelled of rosemary and roasted garlic. When they arrived, I hugged Sophia with a warmth that made her flinch. Throughout the dinner, I was the exemplary hostess. They relaxed. Then, during dessert, I began my psychological offensive. "You know, Sophia," I said casually, "the other day I ran into an old friend from your hometown back in Ohio. She asked about you, but I couldn't tell her anything about your family. My mistake." I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. "Oh, we don't really keep in touch," she said. I smiled. "What a shame. Family is a safe harbor, isn't it? Especially when things get tough." I remember when Richard's business almost went under. It was a time of enormous shame for him, but the honesty with which he handled it, in the end, that only increased the respect everyone had for him. Transparency is such a rare virtue these days. I looked directly at her, my smile as sweet as poison. The message had been delivered. I hadn't accused her of a thing. I just described the virtue I knew she lacked, and the shame I knew she was hiding. 2 days later, the official invitation for the wedding celebration party arrived. Thick cardstock, gold lettering, the epitome of the facade they wanted to project. This was the stage I had been waiting for. I called them, my voice overflowing with childish enthusiasm. "Darlings, I received the invitation. It's gorgeous. I can't wait to celebrate. I insist on contributing a generous gift to help with the expenses. I want this day to be absolutely perfect, a day no one will ever forget." My offer of money, I knew, was a power move. My sudden investment in the success of an event that celebrated my own humiliation was an enigma they couldn't solve, and fear of the unknown was a far more effective torture than any direct confrontation. On the afternoon of the party, as I dressed, I looked at my reflection. The navy blue dress that once represented my pain now felt like armor. On my vanity lay my speech. Not the old one, but a new one, written on small cue cards, just bullet points, dates, names, dollar amounts. The truth, distilled into its purest, most lethal form. The woman staring back at me was not a victim. She was a consequence. They thought my silence was defeat. In fact, it was the calm before my storm. The ballroom was an assault on the senses. Crystal chandeliers, white flower arrangements, a string quartet, a scene of manufactured perfection. As I entered, whispers followed me like a shadow. I was the unexpected attraction, the villain who dared to show up at the ball. I held my head high, a serene smile on my lips. My calm was my armor. James was tense. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Sophia, on the other hand, was in her element, radiating the confidence of a victor. I hugged my son. "You look so handsome, my love," I whispered. Then I turned to Sophia and hugged her too. "Congratulations, Sophia. I wish you everything you deserve." My tone was sweet, but I felt her stiffen. My performance was too perfect. My submission was more terrifying to them than my fury. The MC called for the speeches. Sophia's father spoke of his princess, his warrior. Then came James, his speech short and nervous, full of cliches about soulmates. Then the MC said, "And now, a word from the woman who gave us the groom, his mother, Catherine." A hush fell over the room. I rose, took my cue cards, and walked to the stage. I was not there to make a toast. I was there to officiate a funeral, the funeral of their lie. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and steady. "It is an honor to be here, celebrating two such special people, James My son. My heart overflows with pride. I looked at him. One last glimpse of genuine motherly love. Then, I turned my gaze to Sophia, and the show began. And Sophia. What can I say about Sophia? She is the personification of courage. For example, many of you don't know, but Sophia has such deep humility that for a long time, she told us her family was from Ohio. A simple, modest story. Only later did I learn the truth, that her journey was far more complex, marked by overcoming great hardship right here in New York. After difficult times her family faced in Jersey City, proof that she reinvents herself, the first seed was planted. I saw her father choke on his champagne, and that strength is also seen in her education. She told me she attended a top university, but left out of idealism. The truth I later discovered is even nobler. She chose a more modest institution because her priority was not status, but helping her family recover from a devastating bankruptcy. What a sacrifice. What a devoted daughter. The murmur in the hall began. Sophia's face was losing its color. James was looking at her, a frown of confusion forming on his brow. It was time to deepen the wound. And that is why, James, your gesture was so magnificent, I continued, turning to my son. When you learned of Sophia's family's old emergency, you didn't hesitate. You took a substantial part of your father's inheritance, over $200,000, and used it to settle the debts that haunted them. You told no one, not even me. You did it in silence, because that's what a real man does. He protects his wife's honor, no matter the cost. The buzz in the hall became a shocked silence. $200,000. The number hung in the air, heavy and ugly. And the final proof of this mutual consideration was the wedding itself. Sophia, worried about burdening me, organized a secret, intimate ceremony. And so I wouldn't feel left out. She made sure to have her own family there, her parents and siblings, to represent all family love in that moment. It was a gesture so thoughtful, so delicate, it left me speechless. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just praised her to death. I picked up my glass. So I ask you to raise your glasses. To the newlyweds, and to the truth, because in the end, it's the only thing you can build something on that will last. My final word, last, hung in the air in a bubble of absolute silence. From my pulpit, I had a panoramic view of the devastation. Sophia was a statue of ice, her face a pale wax mask. Her eyes, fixed on me, held no hurt, only the pure, primal hatred of a predator, whose camouflage has been stripped away. And James, he was a man watching the ground open up beneath his feet, discovering that the house he thought was made of stone was, in fact, built of cards. Beside them, Sophia's parents were a study in contained fury. They weren't shocked by their daughter's lies. They were shocked they had been caught. The silence finally broke with the sharp clink of a fork falling onto a porcelain plate. The murmurs began, growing into a wave of sound sweeping the room. My work here was done. Deliberately, I placed the microphone back on its stand. I descended the steps and walked back to my table. People parted for me, their gazes a mixture of fear and fascination. I picked up my purse, left my glass of water untouched, and headed for the exit. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on my back, a physical weight, but for the first time in years, I felt light. I was walking away from a lifetime of silent sacrifices. I was burning the bridge that connected me to my son. Yes, but it was a bridge that had long served only for him to take from me. I wasn't destroying our relationship. I was merely officiating its death. As I reached the grand double doors, I allowed myself one last look back. The scene was chaotic. I saw Sophia grabbing James's arm, her face twisted in a hissing fury. I saw James pull away from her, a gesture of revulsion, his face a mask of betrayal. I saw Sophia's father rise, pointing a trembling finger in my direction, shouting something lost in the growing noise. These were the sounds of a world built on lies as it came crashing down, but I was no longer a part of it. I pushed the door open and stepped into the cool, quiet night air. The sound of the tumultuous party was cut off, muffled, as if from another planet. I took a deep breath. The air had never felt so pure. In the shocked silence I left behind, my version of the story was finally not just heard. It was felt, like a wound being opened to be cleansed. And for the first time, the wound was no longer mine. The drive home was made in a silence that was the opposite of the one I'd left behind. In the ballroom, the silence was dense, the prelude to chaos. In my car, it was clean, the sound of freedom. There was no euphoria. There was only a profound calm. I knew my phone would soon explode with furious calls, but for now, I was in a bubble of peace. The image of James's face, the betrayal in his eyes, the pain of his shattered illusion. I felt a pang, not of regret, but of a surgeon's sorrow who had to amputate a limb to save the body. I didn't destroy my son. I forced him to face the poison he had chosen to drink, hoping that one day he might find the antidote. When I got home, the quiet welcomed me like an old friend. I made tea and sat in my armchair. It was there that the true lesson began to form. My entire life had been built on a misunderstanding, that love was something earned through service. To be loved, I needed to be needed. I didn't give unconditional love. I paid a maintenance fee to ensure my place in their lives. The act I committed tonight, my great villainy, was not an act of revenge. It was my resignation. It was my declaration that I was no longer willing to work for scraps of a love that was never real. It was the first time I affirmed that my value was not in what I could do for them, but in who I was. And who I was, I discovered tonight, was someone who was no longer for sale. Do I regret it? No, not for a second, but I know the cost of my freedom. The image of me as the beloved matriarch, surrounded by children and grandchildren at Sunday lunches, that image is dead, and it hurts. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was to die a little each day, silenced by my own cowardice. Between a slow death and a clean execution, I chose the latter. My most destructive act was, paradoxically, my first genuine act of self-preservation. The earthquake I caused had aftershocks that lasted for weeks. I heard through the grapevine that the party ended minutes after I left. The fairy tale of James and Sophia crumbled. I heard they didn't separate. Instead, their union, born of a shared lie, became their shared penance, chained to each other not by love, but by shame. There was one last contact. A week after the party, my phone rang. It was James. He screamed that I was a monster, that I had destroyed his life out of selfishness, that I never truly loved him. I remained in absolute silence. I let him empty all his poison. When he finally stopped, breathless, my voice was calm. "I heard you, James," I said. "I gave you the truth. What you choose to do with it now is your responsibility. I wish you peace." And before he could answer, I hung up. Then, with a simple motion, I blocked his number. The umbilical cord was finally severed. In the months that followed, I dismantled my old life to build a new one. I sold the house. With the money, I bought a smaller apartment on the top floor of a building downtown, with a balcony overlooking the skyline, a place with no past. I enrolled in an Italian class. I started painting again. I joined a book club, where I met women who knew me as Catherine, the amateur painter who loves historical novels, not as James's mother. I was learning to be a whole person, not just someone else's satellite. Today, a year later, my life is unrecognizable, and it is wonderful. I no longer feel the ghost of loneliness. I feel the fullness of solitude, and I realize the peace I found is not despite my villainy, but because of it. That act of destruction was my act of creation. That is my story, the version no one wanted to hear, to the world. I am the vengeful mother-in-law who publicly humiliated her son's bride. That is the accusation. In my version, I was the only one with the courage to disinfect a festering wound. My method was brutal, I know, but the disease was terminal. Now, the case is in your hands, the court of public opinion. Does a mother have the right or the duty to intervene in an adult child's life when she believes he is being fundamentally deceived? I chose the truth, and the price of that choice was my son. My peace and my dignity cost me my family. And I ask you, the jury, was it a fair trade? I don't ask for your forgiveness, as I don't believe I was wrong. I don't ask for your sympathy, as I am no longer a victim. I only ask for your verdict. Look at the facts. The calculated exclusion, the silent humiliation, the lies that supported a castle of cards. And look at my act, a public, merciless, and final exposure. With all that in mind, answer me. Was I a necessary villain, or a wounded mother who went too far? Leave your sentence in the comments below. Your debate is the only way we can understand the shadows we all carry. And if you believe every woman judged by society deserves to have her side of the story heard, subscribe to the channel, because there are many other trials waiting for you. And in each one, I guarantee, the truth is far more complex and dangerous than it first appears.